Well, Billy Napier is now officially the new head coach of the Florida Gators, introduced today in Gainesville after winning the Sun Belt Conference with Louisiana yesterday, staying there at Louisiana one extra week to get the job done. He talked about a little bit of that at the press conference. I'm just going to give sort of my little overview of the press conference specifically. There will be more coming up tomorrow on both Gators Breakdown and Stand Up and Holler, but wanted to give my initial sort of thoughts. So, it's funny. The first thing I thought I was going to be interested in was what Napier had to say about recruiting, and we'll get to that in a minute. But there was one thing that really, I think, stood out to me. And I've talked to a few people since Napier got hired, or the announcement was made that he was hired last week. And the word that they used to describe him was genuine. And I think that came through. The thing that he said multiple times, that, the scared money don't make money moniker is something that's now on t-shirts and people are really gravitating to. But the thing I'm gravitating to is what he said a few times today during the press conference, where he said, one day at a time, one person at a time. And, he sort of tied that into his dad passing away from ALS and his dad's ability to handle and manage that disease with both impeccable character and through the prism of his faith, and how that impacted Billy Napier and how that changed him. And you saw that in the press conference, where he thanked the Louisiana administration, the faculty, the staff, the players, and the Louisiana community, and that he told Florida's players to reach out to his Louisiana players and ask about him. And really being straightforward that some days the players may not like him, but that football is a game about people, strategy, and competition. He said, really, their job is going to be figuring out how best to serve the players. And that servant leadership aspect of things sort of tied in with his faith, the idea that he was quoting Joshua during the press conference, all of that stuff sort of lends credence to all the things we've heard about him being genuine. Now, obviously, it's easy to be genuine in an introductory press conference, but all of the information that's come out from Louisiana, the fact that they've all been so happy that he's gotten this job at Florida, that they feel like he fulfilled his word, that he did what he was supposed to do, and that they're really sort of, this is kind of like when you see a ball player in AAA and he makes it to the majors, you're sad that he's no longer on your AAA team, but you're thrilled that he's in the major leagues. And that's really what it feels like with Louisiana and the whole Ragin' Cajuns community with Napier coming to Florida. And so, the thing, again, like I said, I thought that it was going to be the recruiting stuff that stuck out, but it really wasn't. It was the one day at a time, one person at a time, the idea that Napier is going to be focused on the relationship aspect of things. And I think that's something that genuine nature is going to lead into recruiting, obviously. But also, I think it's going to lead to hopefully a better relationship with the fans. And if there is a need to be patient, that those fans will give the patience that they need. So let's get to recruiting, though, because that's obviously a big part of it. So the thing that stuck out to me is he said it directly. This is a talent acquisition business. And the funny thing is that's really true about just about every business, right? The more talented people you have, the better off you're going to be. Now, he did follow that up by saying he wasn't worried about 4 stars or 5 stars, but that he was going to evaluate. But no coach really emphasizes 4 stars or 5 stars, or says, yeah, I'm going to subscribe to the recruiting service and only to the recruiting services. But at the end of the day, if you're a competitor and if you're going after the same guys that Nick Saban and Kirby Smart are going after, those 4 stars and 5 stars are going to be coming your way if you're going to do that. Now, the thing he did say, he said he's going to hire an army of people to sell Florida throughout all of the recruiting process. The recruiting plan starts with a focus on Florida, and that the proximity to players in Florida is a distinct advantage, that they need to get them on campus. The staff needs to do their jobs. And he said, quote, if we can't sign 25 good players, you'll be looking for a new coach. So he clearly understands that his success or failure at Florida is going to come down to, in large part, bringing in the players who can help him win on the field. And so, again, I wouldn't go get all that worried about the 4-star or 5-star commentary, but I would look towards what he's doing in terms of being able to put an army of people out there to sell Florida to Florida recruits. And that, again, I think is a huge deal, considering that Alabama has come in and really been able to raid the state, that Miami and Florida State have been down and the Gators have not been able to take advantage of that. And that even Clemson, Ohio State, and Georgia have been able to come into the state and get a lot of the players that Florida would have wanted. And now hopefully that's going to stop. Now, when it comes to the transition class, Napier did say that they're going to be patient And the quote there is, he said, the last thing we need to do is make mistakes. And again, I think that is probably a prudent approach. Typically, the transition class is not where you're going to evaluate the coach. If you look at Jim McElwain, he was in the 20s. That wasn't great. But if you look at Will Muschamp, you look at Urban Meyer, you look at Dan Mullen, those guys were all sort of in the 10 to 12 range in terms of their transition class. That's probably okay. The thing we're going to want to look at is the bump class. I'm going to have an article coming up in the next day or two that's looking at that. And I think there you don't necessarily need to be patient, but I think for the transition class you do. And the reason I think that's important, again, he said the last thing we need to do is make mistakes. And if you look at Dan Mullen's initial 2018 class, that transition class, Kyle Pitts was a huge get there, right? But then you look at guys who were not able to stay with the program because they were dismissed even before any of the games were ever played. There was a lot of attrition on both the 2018 and 2019 classes. And we saw that really crop up this year. And so, the fact that he talks about that it's important in recruiting that both sides understand each other, that there's really this give and take, and that it's a disservice to either side. So the word he used was elope, right, with only a couple of weeks until signing day, and really sort of talked about regrouping after signing day to then look at what was going on both in the high school recruiting ranks, but also then as well with the transfer portal. So, people may not be thrilled that he said they're going to be patient, but at the end of the day, if you sign 20 guys and 18 of them end up staying versus signing 25 and 18 of them end up staying, you really sort of ended up at the same place. And if you have better relationships with the 20 that you signed instead of the 25, I think it's okay to at least take a little bit of a step back in the transition recruiting class, assuming that you're going to put all the systems and processes in place in order to make sure that bump class is top 3, top 5 then in 2023. So the third thing I think that you can point out is what he calls the journey, right? That he talked about knowing that there's a high desire to win when the ball gets kicked off here coming up in the fall, but that it's critical to channel that desire to win into a daily process with a detailed plan executed phase by phase. And that journey program is going to be supported. That, the UF is willing to put resources in that Napier asked for. He said that was a big part of why he came to the University of Florida. But then you look at his contract, he's got $7.5 million dedicated to staff, 10 staff members, and then $5 million for support staff. That's a lot of money when you consider the $7.1 million that Napier is actually getting in 2022 to be the head coach. Now you're looking at upwards of almost $20 million plus the money that's being used to buy out Dan Mullen. It's a lot of money being committed to Billy Napier to build this program. He talked about the football program being broken into 8 phases. So foundations, identity, spring practice, discretionary period, summer, training camp, in-season, and postseason, that there were specific goals and objectives at each phase. The idea is to break down every phase, have short-term goals for the players in each of those phases so that you can see constant improvement. Again, none of this stuff is like earth-shattering things that you wouldn't think to see from a good CEO. But when you combine that with what he's talking about in terms of building the relationships and the one day at a time, one person at a time, being a servant for the players, I think in some capacity now you start to see maybe how that melds with the journey and how Napier might be somebody who can really get the job done. So look, it's just day one. You can win the press conference, lose the press conference. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what happens on the field. What matters is bringing the fans hope and bringing the fans a clear vision in terms of how the program is going to succeed, so that the fans, so that the staff, so that the players can all buy in and say, this is the vision. We're following this guy because we believe in this guy and we believe he can get the job done. And here's the deal. I think that, with Dan Mullen, a lot of us bought into the Gator standard. A lot of us bought into relentless effort. When you looked at Jim McElwain, a lot of us bought into the fact that he could get any quarterback, even if it was his dog, to quarterback Florida and score points. And if you go back to Will Muschamp, the idea that the Florida program, in Urban Meyer's words, was broken. And then you brought in Will Muschamp to sort of fix up some of that mess. And the reality is Muschamp was actually a really likable guy. I think most people in Gainesville, even now, still really like Will Muschamp. He just didn't win enough, even though he was able to recruit, and even though his vision was pretty good, just wasn't able to score points. So, it's not as though we haven't been excited about these guys when they've come in. Napier has a really good profile. I mean, I've written about that. We've talked about that on a few different podcasts, that he has a really good profile. You look at it and say, out of all the guys who are sort of sitting at that, non-Power 5 level, who would you bring in? He's really at the top of the list. Obviously got the Saban pedigree, learned some lessons when things didn't work out at Clemson, and has applied the lessons that he learned at Alabama at Louisiana, and done it in a way where everyone in Louisiana seems to just love and adore him. So, it's not often that you see someone have a breakup and they go to the next place and there don't seem to be any sour grapes. And maybe some stories of sour grapes will come out in the next few weeks, or if he struggles at Florida, maybe some of those stories will come out. But as of right now, it just looks like Napier has really been able to put his imprint on that Louisiana community without necessarily, and leave that community in a better place than it was, and leave everybody happy for the 4 years that he was able to put in there, and really finish the job with that Sun Belt win this past week. So look, I mean, there are a lot of things you can say. I mean, you have Brian Kelly going into LSU, faking a Southern accent. You've got Lincoln Riley going out to USC, which just seems like kind of a weird fit. You got Brent Venables from Clemson going out to Oklahoma now, if what was reported is true. You've got Manny Diaz, who went and worked for Temple for like a week and a half until Miami hired him a few years ago, now sort of in limbo with potentially Mario Cristobal coming over from Oregon. So there's a lot of movement going on. Obviously, a lot of new coaches, and Napier's going to be evaluated against all of those guys. And he's not going to be evaluated on what he said in terms of, one day at a time, one person at a time. He's not going to be evaluated based on whether the players like him. And he's not going to be evaluated based on whether he wins press conferences or loses press conferences. He's going to be evaluated based on what happens on the field. And I think the encouraging thing is that what's happened on the field when he's been the head coach at Louisiana is an awful lot of winning, and that there are a lot of good players at Florida right now. I mean, we talk about sub-elite recruiting, but I'm very careful to say sub-elite recruiting under Dan Mullen, because they're still very, very good players at the University of Florida. You get guys like DeMarcus Bowman and Anthony Richardson coached up in a system where Napier is going to be able to utilize their talents to the best of their abilities. And all of a sudden you say, okay, this is a team that can compete at pretty high level year one. And then the question is, where do you go from there? So that was always the question with Mullen. It wasn't that we didn't think that with Anthony Richardson and DeMarcus Bowman and some of those other guys that he wasn't going to be able to have a much better offense this year, and potentially with a new defensive coordinator. It was that, what are you building to after that year? And it's interesting because we're going to see that concept with Michigan this year, that Michigan has now won the Big Ten. They're now in the playoff. They're going to get an opportunity against Georgia. Potentially Harbaugh maybe wins a national championship this year. He's one of 4 teams that has a shot to do it at this point. But at the end of the day, I still think that when you look at that Big Ten, would you rather be Michigan or would you rather be Ohio State? And today, maybe people would say Michigan because they got a chance to fly the flag. But I think long-term, Ohio State is probably the healthier of the organizations. And so that to me is the big takeaway here from this press conference from Napier today. He talked about one day at a time, one person at a time, but he talked about using that journey process to make Florida the best football team in the SEC and the best program in the SEC. And what that really means is that he's taking aim at Alabama and he's taking aim at Georgia, because right now those are the best football teams in the SEC and those are the best programs in the SEC. And so if Florida is going to compete with that, Billy Napier is going to have to compete with that as well, which means he's going to win on the field, at the program level, at the recruiting level, and then at the personal level, because that seems to be how he feels is the best job to put this journey in place to get the job done. If you like these videos, please consider supporting me on Patreon, or you can follow me at WillMilesSEC on Twitter or at Facebook.com/readandreaction. Until next time, be a smarter fan.